From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers and filmmaking artists. I'm happy to have you here. For the Impossible Mission Force's 8 adventures on the big screen, composers accepting the 60-second challenge have included Danny Elfman, Hans Zimmer, Joe Kramer, Michael Giacchino, and Lauren Balfe, all bonded together by Lalo Schifrin's iconic TV themes. While Balfe began Dead Reckoning's fight against an evil AI entity and its human pawns, the battle that now encompasses the entire film series and its seeming conclusion now recruits the talented fresh faces of Max ARUJ and ALFIE GODFREY. Having worked as part of Hans Zimmer and Lauren Balfe's team on the likes of Top Gun Maverick, Black Widow, and Mission Impossible Fallout, ARUJ's own impressive scores include the OG gangster Lansky and the action of Ice Road. Godfrey also counts himself as a member of Maverick, as well as his own scores for Town Called Malice and Marching Powder. Together, ARUJ and Godfrey are dynamite in providing the suspenseful fuel of Final Reckoning, impressively bringing new inventiveness and varying the essential partner of Lalo Schifrin's music. ARUJ and Godfrey provide their own time-bomb ticking intensity to epic submarine and biplane set pieces with a score that's equally about a relentless countdown and Ethan Hunt's emotion for the unbreakable bond of a spy family in Mission Impossible's most daunting race to save the world from AI and its human cultists. It's music that fills the IMAX frame to show that ARUJ and Godfrey's suspenseful skills are more than capable to save a world on the brink. And now here to talk about accepting the most impressive mission in high-stakes Hollywood scoring, our Final Reckoning composers Max ARUJ and ALFIE GODFREY. Welcome to Film Music Live.
Thank you, Daniel, for having us. Great to see you.
Thank you, Danny. That was the epic intro.
Well, talk about an epic score. How did this team come together?
So Alfie and I met many years ago working for our former boss and mentor, Lauren Balfe. And we met in LA, and working under someone like Lauren, we are trained together, we work together, we're able to share music and ideas, melodies and chords. And we were lucky enough to get to be introduced to Christopher McQuarrie. And then in June of last year, I moved to London full time to be composing in the office with Alfie and with our score producer, Cecile, and we're working all together under the same roof, making the score.
Max come on your radar even before this started?
Sorry, Daniel, could you repeat the question? I lost you there for a sec.
How did Max come on your radar, Alfie, before this even started? What did you think of your guys' respective music?
Well, I joined Lauren's team later than Max. Max was there many years before I was. And so we had a few years of crossover, and then Max moved on before I did. And yeah, I mean, that's where I knew him. I learned very quickly joining Lauren's team how hard you got to work, and watching him and Stefan Thumb, who's another kind of colleague and amazing composer, friend of me and Max's, they were very sharp, they were very quick, and they kind of showed me the ropes along with Lauren about really what it means to do this job. And, when they moved on from the company, I was still there for a few more years, and that's, when the mentorship between me and Lauren really started, and that's where I really learnt my walk and my talk in this job.
So now we've got our first question from Louis Versalini. Hey, Max and Alfie, what is your relationship as co-composers, and what's the workload look like? How do you score something as a team?
Well, step one is we just need to start writing music. So we sit at our respective rigs, and we're kind of free just to work on whatever ideas we want to, whether it be a drama cue or whether it be a bravery scene or a more tender scene. And we essentially start, and at the end of the day or the next day, we just walk into each other's rooms and we play each other music, and we just have the question, what do you think of this? How about this melody? What about this percussion here? And we just have an honest conversation of what do we think could work where? How could something be improved? How could something be changed? And we'll start to play things from a cue, and it just becomes clear over time what's working and what isn't, and whatever is working, we expound upon that and make more variations. And if it isn't working, we'll put it to the sidelines, and then guess what? Maybe it'll come to use 7 months later down the line when we're finishing the movie and we need some little spice. So really, it's just about writing your own stuff, then coming together, then integrating the work.
You know, one thing I really loved, particularly about your scoring, I mean, all the composers who have done mission films have had their, way with Lalo Schifrin, and you guys really took the OG scoring in some really interesting directions. I mean, are you given the actual sheet music that Lalo did in terms of deconstructing these iconic themes and then reworking them, for this film?
I don't think we got street music strictly. Really, Lalo's did so much work with the TV show, and then kind of Mission as we knew it was, as it was standardized, was probably kind of Danny Elfman. But in terms of Lalo's contribution, I think, it's the plot theme and the mission theme, and obviously all the ways he explored that. But, we didn't actually need sheet music for that. But yeah, thank you for your compliment about the classic scoring style. I mean, McHugh, the director, he's a very, very big fan of the classic films and of orchestral thematic writing. So we were encouraged and felt very safe in that kind of style.
I mean, Max, was this stuff like burned on your brain? Like, okay, we can do this or we can do this with it.
Absolutely. I love nothing more than to do theme and variations and to just play. And this is the perfect place to do that. And there was no limitations, no rules really. We're able to make our own rules. We take the theme and we augment it. We take out notes. We add notes. We put it low, put it high, stretch it out, insert phrases in between notes. There's endless things you can do, and it's the best possible assignment as a composer.
Yeah. Now we've got a question from Jacob. I noticed the thrilling scenes with Angela Bassett as the president have music that doesn't overpower the action. How do you compose music that stays subtle but still adds to the scene's vibe?
Yeah, it's a good question. How is you try lots of things and it's very clear what's working and what isn't, and what can feel like something can feel like it's working on that day, and then you watch the film in a run, and that scene with Angela, it's just way too much. For some reason, you're just exhausted. You don't need that. If anything, it's distracting from that. So you try it in very ruthless ways, and you try it in more ways than one. I mean, and yeah, you got to be subtle. I think. McHugh's note that he said a lot goes, this music is telling me I have no confidence in my movie, which is such a good note, because I think if it was over the top and overpowering, it would be doing that. It would saying, I think the audience won't get this. I think I think the audience are stupid. We need to tell them these things. You don't need to tell them these things. You just need them to feel these things. So that was the line we were towing with those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, but Max, was because one thing I noticed is that the score again, which was mostly orchestral, really kind of kept an even keel, especially in these very tense, dramatic scenes. What was your pickup in terms of approaching them?
Well, I think to also piggyback on the last question, a lot of the time it's not just what the music is doing, it's when it's doing it. If you choose to punctuate something in between dialogue after an important line, or if you're going to kind of tee up the audience to listen to, and here's our plan. So if you isolate these moments and know when to put a theme and when to go low with the strings and when to have a subtle horn melody, that is when it starts to feel like kind of a classic movie where you're placing the melodies in just the right spot so the audience knows that this is a time when we should feel heroic, this is a time when we should feel pensive, or this is the time when we should feel tender. If you have a good theme, if you place it at these moments and this tender music, then it feels like a classic and kind of traditional film. And that's something we were always going for, and McHugh pushed for that from the very first day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the really impressive cues right at the start of the film is Tom Cruise doing his Johnny Mnemonic thing in that in the AI capsule. And again, it's a pretty powerful. Essentially, the AI is the invisible villain in the whole movie, but he's got like that one big scene. Again, I loved how you used the chorus, and the chorus isn't something I really remember. I mean, it's some great past Mission Impossible scores, but I don't really remember a lot of chorus in those scores. Tell me about scoring the whole kind of vision of the apocalypse sequence.
Yeah, that came very, very late in the process. And in the Asia premiere, I think it was either Tom or McHugh said to the audience, I believe in Tokyo, scene was finished 3 days ago, which is absurd to think of a cinema full of people, and that was true. It came right at the end, and it was a really difficult part of the film for everyone, for us, but also for McHugh and Tom. They just couldn't figure out how and what shape it would be. And when Tom comes out of the coffin, that kind of is really where the film starts. That's really where we know, the audience and Ethan, the character, know what the film is going to be like, really, where it's going to go and what things it's got to deal with. And yeah, being inside the coffin, I suppose it's this kind of fever dream. It had many shapes and sizes. The montage used to be this really long thing, and we did this kind of very beautiful melodic thing, and we even recorded it. And McHugh and Eddie, I remember they came into the kitchen one day at work and just said, "I'm sorry, we've changed it." And I think towards the end, as all the other strands of the film came together, they then realized what it is the entity needs to say to Ethan, and what it is it needs to show to Ethan in order to justify Ethan's behavior for the rest of the film. And thank you for noticing the choir. I love the way we use choir in this film. The words, the reference Space Odyssey came up, and obviously it's a nod to that, but it's not that referential. It's not strictly Ligeti, which is that composer they reference that is used in Space Odyssey. It's slightly weird. It's Mission Impossible theme if you strain your ears. It's got this ethereal, strange discomfort vibe to it. It also uses our low voices. We book these they're called octavists, and it's the kind of the lowest note a human can sing. It's the same range as a double bass, really. It's kind of a bass, but even lower than that. And we use those guys too. And it's a very peculiar kind of, as I said, a fever dream part of the film that, you would never think it would be in a Mission Impossible film. And that's what I like about this film, is it has 2 or 3 spots that are very, very unique to this installment of the franchise.
Max, what did you think about that whole sequence?
I think we couldn't finish that scene until we got the final voiceover and the final edit. As Alfie said, it had a complete different life of its own, and the end was something was crucial, because the whole dialogue bit before was we had to set a tone and we had to shift at just the right spots, but really with any scene you got to stick the landing. So the end bit was crucial to saying, okay, this is going to happen. And from the bit when the entity stops talking until the end to say, this is the stakes the film are at, that is how we had to finish it. And that got everybody really excited. And in moments like this, when the scene isn't working and we haven't scored it yet, there's a bit of anticipation. So when we got everybody on board with the end and with the rising choir stuff, which was a blast to record live, that's how we really kind of wrapped practically the whole film up with a bow, is finishing that end bit of that scene.
Yeah, and it's incredibly effective. Now, Aaron Cruz would like to know, what was the spotting process like for you both?
Yeah, I mean, I think spotting in its strictest term, so you sit down, you watch a film from beginning to end, and say music starts here and ends here. I actually don't do that often, if ever. I think it's a kind of old school thing to do things that way, partly because of temp. Temp does a lot of that for you, and when you're brought on as a composer, those kind of questions are already answered about when and where music is coming. Spotting this film, when we started it, it had zero temp, which is very rare these days. And it was very long. It was 4.5, around 4 hours long. So, the scenes were very long. It had all the lines, not the lines they were going to take out. It had everything. The action sequences were very long. It didn't have its pacing yet. It didn't have all these things that we get as an audience right at the end. So what came in this film was we kind of had to just go and write something. We picked a scene that was vibing with us that day and just went for it. And we learned that was the way to do it, because that really started the conversation. Once we had our first attempt, it became clearer to McHugh, okay, this is actually where it should start, and actually it shouldn't be sad, it should be happy, etc., etc. So spotting for this film was actually just writing something to a dry scene and just holding your breath and seeing what information came out of it.
Right. I mean, Max, did you see a thing? Okay, this is the start. This is the stop. We should have no music here. I mean, how did your own ideas come into play?
You could try and do that, Daniel, but every time we thought we had the answer, let's say we wrote a cue, and McHugh would say, let's shove it 3 seconds to the right. And then we'd watch it again, and something would happen that we did not expect. And we all kind of looked at each other and went, this is even better. Yeah. And then, of course, after you do that, everything else is off. But sometimes that would work better too, or it wouldn't. So you kind of have this endless process of moving everything around you've done to the frame. But what we learned is that if it is a piece of music that works with the movie and with the scene in general, it will happen to have the same pace as other parts of the movie, and it will also work with other parts of dialogue, and it will also hit other hit points in even a different scene in a different reel. So I think that also speaks to the genius of Eddie Hamilton, the fact that when he's editing and when he's editing with McHugh, they clearly come upon an internal rhythm that is natural and musical. Therefore, it makes our job easier for us that when we start to understand the film, start to understand the story and the pacing of the dialogue, music that we write will work for other spots. It's basically mathematics. It's almost incredible how well it works sometimes.
I mean, like, another sequence I really loved in the film, and I think all of us have been traumatized by corpses in water since that head popped out of the boat in Jaws. There's just something about like floating corpses that just get to me, is the entire submarine sequence, because essentially he's in a graveyard and he's almost near the point of death, trying to get that key out of that safe, and it's a really long sequence. And again, things are kind of moving in slow motion with the missiles, but again, they're not like crashing, they're slow. So how did the whole literal gravity of that scene, the graveyard effect, play into this gigantic sequence?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's pure stress, that whole sequence, without it being overpowering or exhausting, which is something we found out we couldn't do way too much. And sound design had this problem too. It was very easy just to go overwhelming. And we had to really figure out pace, starting from one size, slowly getting bigger, slowly getting bigger. Ethan has his own stages, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So we couldn't turn it up to 11 straight away. And sound had this journey too. Also, he is underwater. He's in a new world. He's in a new universe. And we figured out very early on that violins and flutes and harps, it wouldn't work down there in the depths of the ocean. That wasn't going to be our toolkit. So McHugh was very excited, and he had this idea early on of using an instrument called the space bass, which is this kind of marimba looking thing. It's massive and it's made of sheet metal, and you bow it and you strike it, and it has this deep resonance, and it really gave us the foundation on to build this sonic world that is the Submarine. We did have room for brass chords, we did have room for melodies and chords towards the end as we needed to kind of carry the narrative in the way a film score usually does. But the space bass was a window into a very strange world, and we also had our low voices in there too.
Yeah, Max, how did you follow Ethan's path through that submarine?
Well, you made a good point. You used the word slow motion, and of course the scene isn't literally in slow motion, but one of the things with this scene and the plane, which I'm sure we'll touch on later, is that the fact that rhythm and a lot of percussion and a lot of short strings just didn't work in the submarine because it is a slow moving beast. So we had to use other elements to create tension. And a lot of the time we had this great percussionist named Luis Perez. We had him work on these unusual sounds and creating sounds by rubbing bass drums and bowing metal that created a counterpoint to the space bass. And the reason the scene works is that we tried to use elements so specifically with the timing so that when something moves, we have a sound go with it. And that's something Cecile and Timmery, our other music editor, we worked with extensively, and they worked tirelessly to make sure that when the edit changed, the sounds have to occur in the same spots. Because if you just put a wash of cool sounds over a 20-minute sequence, the audience will disengage. So it's crucial that the sounds bounce off of specific motions of Ethan and of the sub turning, and then the missiles dropping at just the right moment. So as usual with film music, timing is everything, and that couldn't apply more in a scene that's musically a little more ambient and not as rhythmic.
Right. So that brings us to a question from the score architect. Can you talk more about Cecile, and what role does a musical producer play?
Yeah, it's true. It can be quite ambiguous about what exactly a score producer does, and across many different films and projects, the role of a score producer can actually change. It's not always strictly one thing. Cecile, her skills and her first and foremost is a music editor, so she is taking the vast amount of stems and material from us and cutting it into picture and fixing our mistakes and telling us what we're doing wrong and telling us what we're doing right. She has a complete and utter command of the mix and of the timing. I mean, to see her work is really amazing. But for this film in particular, she has done Top Gun with McHugh and Tom, and she's done Mission Impossible Fallout, Dead Reckoning Part 1, and this. So, we are very grateful for her because McHugh and Tom have a huge amount of trust in her. And, her journey over those films, she has become very integral to the producer side. So, creative decisions, she will be kind of doing what Eddie does with picture, but with music too. It can be quite broad in terms of her kind of emotional and I would say story, stuff of the film as well. She will be feeding us ideas. We were always so surprised something we've written from one part of the film would end up in another part of the film, and she would really manage all that too. There's a great deal that goes on in the mix, in the everything going on at the recording, logistically and creatively, and she was kind of hinge point of all that too. She was with us, for every review. She was with us for every note, and it really, she was part of the team as much as me and Max were.
How did Cecile play into what you were doing, Max?
Can you say one question one more time, please?
How did Cecile play into what you were doing?
Oh, I mean, she's brilliant. It's to work with someone like that, I think is so special. And yeah, we're sitting there at 2 a.m. and we're trying to think, like, what do we do with this part?
Mm.
And we'll just sit there and try things, and we'll just talk to each other and talk about, well, this melody is going up here, but that really can't be right because he's falling down. Or I'll play something, Cecile, and we'll just say, yeah, this just isn't quite working. How do we do this? And then Cecile will say, let's take out all the short strings, all the percussion, and then we'll say, well, what if we slow this down? And do we really need the first melody phrase here? And in the fifth melody phrase, this middle melody note is coming right on a piece of dialogue. What if we just mute that there and just extend the first note? And you're sort of, you almost can't believe you're doing this for a living, because you are working in these subtleties and these specific things with music that are so creative that you think, wow, this is really, we are reaching really far here for something very abstract to try and make a scene feel more realistic. It's so subjective. But the point of working with someone so experienced like Cecile is that you are working towards the same goal. And when you've done scenes like this before, you think, okay, well, if this piece of dialogue is going to be, stepped on by the music, we have to get out of the way here. And then guess what? If you don't do that, especially at the top of the scene, McHugh, it might throw the whole thing off for him if we miss a key piece of dialogue. So it's a combination of using experience and experimentation. And when Cecile and I'd be sitting there working on these tough scenes, I think those are some of my favorite moments, because I feel like I'm learning something and I'm getting better at my craft whenever I'm with her. So, hats off to her.
Oh. So let's talk about the plane.
Yes. So that was the most difficult part of the film, and also the most rewarding part of the film, because there's never been a scene like it, so there's no blueprint. And we were talking before about the submarine, and like lots of ticks and rhythm and short strings didn't seem to do the job. We had a similar challenge with the plane, in that lots of fast strings and lots of percussion, once they're up in the sky, it didn't really do the job. It made it feel slow. When you have lots of short strings, it felt much better for Tom running on the bridge, for example, or him running to the plane. That worked. But once he was airborne, we had to come up with a new language. And so finding the right harmony and the right melody, and we used the melody that we actually used in the first teaser trailer from a piece at the beginning called On the Edge that we did. And we were able to use that when Tom is in the canyon. And so writing variations on this theme became the start for how are we going to amp up the level of danger when he's on the wing? And then how about when he's trying to get from one plane to the other? Or how about when he's in the sky and he and Isai are looking for each other? So we had to split the whole plane sequence, which is 15 to 20 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, into different sections and different acts. So to even find out what those acts were and how the start of the sequence would change from the start to the middle to the end was so difficult, Daniel. And for some of it, we didn't even know how to solve it until we solved other parts. So other parts bounced off of different sections. And for so much of it, we just had to try, is it abstract here? Is it melodic here? Is it chord-based here? And spotting that was the toughest part of the film. At a certain point, we didn't know if there was going to be music in the biplane at all. So think about that when you first watch the movie with no music to the end, and then think over time we realized the plane, as incredible and stunning as the images are, we as the audience, we need cues. What is happening? What is the level of danger? What is he trying to do here? How long is this shot? And so we had to evaluate each and every one of these things before we knew what the right one was. And we had these very long meetings and tough meetings where we think, okay, let's move this 2 minutes this way. Let's try this bit at the beginning of the sequence. And for many, many, many months, nothing worked across the whole sequence. And so making progress even on one of those sections, for instance, him even grabbing onto the plane, we did 7 versions of that scene completely different, and for months none of it worked. In almost nothing worked. So we just had to keep going and like dig back and think, okay, this chord progression that we used 4 months ago for the trailer, what if we made that slower? What if we made it higher? What if we took out the rhythm? What if we took the short strings that we were using for the fight in Reel 1 and these absolutely savage and brutal combinations of different musical elements from all around the film? And believe me, when we finished that and we showed it to Tom, I remember I was sitting there with Tom McHugh, and they played Reel 7 down, and I was sitting right behind Tom thinking, oh my God, I really hope he likes this, because if he doesn't like this, we're in big trouble. And then at the end, he clapped, and then he looked around and he said, great job, guys. That was one of the best moments of the process, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Alfie, how good is your cue approval poker face?
What, the holding my nerve face? Yeah, I know, it's true. I mean, sometimes, as we were saying, it was like so last minute, some of these huge scenes. There were some moments we go, if this isn't right, like we're in trouble. And so, yeah, the poker face was tested there to the limit. But luckily, all the meetings that did matter, there were a few high five moments towards the end. So.
So we've got a question from Jer. Which film score composers are your all-time favorites, and which scores do you listen to over and over again?
Vertigo and The Matrix are my favorite. Vertigo just transports you to a whole nother world when Cary Grant is in these scenes and he just, he's just, and Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, please tell me that's Cary Grant there, because I always think about North by Northwest as well, and I always confuse the two.
Also, that's a Catch a Thief, which this kind
Yes,
of
I know.
definitely has that in there as well.
But the music is so beautiful, and also there's so much drama in it, and I think with the entity in this movie also, there's this alternate world, and I think when the composer is able to combine the two, and in the Matrix as well, it's the same idea where there's multiple worlds, and the music transports you to one, but it has to bridge them as well. So it's just the ultimate creative challenge when they're having to make the audience really feel something and tell a story and take you to somewhere you've never been before.
Here, what's up there for you, favorite wise, or got to put this on over again?
Yeah, I struggle with the favorite song, the favorite film, favorite album question, but I'm happy to speak freely. I share a love of The Matrix of Max. Growing up, I loved James Horner. I listened to, Titanic was one of the real big films of my childhood. I loved John Powell. I love Hans Zimmer and those kind of, and especially kind of the 90s Hans Zimmer, Lion King and Thin Red Line. I remember studying Korngold at university and just being blown away by his work. And then recently, a guy called Emile Mosseri, he's brilliant. He did a film called The Last Black Man in San Francisco. And I'm mentioning that because the question asked, which do you listen to ever again? And Last Black Man in San Francisco, I listen to that album like all the time. I just think it's so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely a great, beautiful film and a great score. This is kind of along the same lines, but Radislav would like to know: do you have a favorite film genre, and which do you like to compose most? Horror, drama, action, cinema? I wish you both a great career. Greetings from Poland. And that kind of brings us to all the genres that this film in particular strikes. I mean, you really have a kind of really cool jump the shark moment for the series. This is a science fiction movie. The villain is, at the moment, science fiction, but I just read the story about the AI trying to blackmail its creators, so who knows? And again, you have a film that just goes through a whole bunch of different genres. How did that play into what you guys were doing?
Well, first of all, Radislav, great to chat with you. I remember meeting you in LA a bunch of years ago.
Oh, really?
I have to say that the plane scene was my favorite. So I think thriller and action in that way, because you you're looking at a scene that no one has ever scored before, and you're thinking, how do I write music that accompanies the most incredible feat, we've ever seen on film? So you're challenged to say how, and this is due to a love of classical music and a love of orchestral music, how with the orchestra do I make this scene come to life? How do I personify Tom in this moment? How do I show the danger? How do I create a melody that works with this? So I think action and thriller in that way is the best. And the fact that McHugh wanted an orchestral score, for people who love classical music like myself, that's the ultimate challenge and assignment, because you could easily do something with a synth that would be wild and crazy and up in the air, but not for this film. That wasn't the language. So the assignment to do this action scene with traditional colors, that was my favorite thing to do of all time.
Wow. Well, how about you, Alfie? I mean, Alfie, just in terms of traversing the different genres, was there a kind of favorite style to play in this score?
It's fun to always write music that's like really crazy and stressful, and I think just because it's like how trigger happy you can be in the process. That said, the music I think that will resonate with people, and kind of the music that I think you will be most proud of, is often the emotional and melodic. So, to answer the question, I worked on a show called A Town Called Malice, and that was a love story, and the scenes where it was between the two lovers, I loved doing. And obviously there was a bit of that in Mission Impossible. There's not a love story or like a romance story in Mission Impossible, but there's very emotional points between the characters, and there's a real warmth and tenderness. It's a very, very tender film. And, so that there's a big end scene at the end of the film that's kind of 9 minutes long, and it's all the characters kind of, resolving it. They're all at peace with what they needed to achieve. And, without giving too much away, but it's a very soft and huggy version, and so that kind of stuff is really fun.
Now we've got a question from Adam. Would you rather have breakfast for dinner or for the rest of your life, or dinner for breakfast? Lots of love from your favorite orchestrator.
Oh, Adam. Well, I would always rather have dinner for breakfast. I love pasta. I love Italian food, and breakfast I like, but I think if I had to choose, so I think what Adam is asking is what are he and I going to have for our next meal when I come to London and when we work together? And the answer is dinner, even if it is breakfast.
Okay, I'm the opposite. I'm such a breakfast guy, and I get teased by my girlfriend that I will have a breakfast-esque meal for dinner often. So I'm a breakfast guy.
Now, I really love it. I love how the movie, just references like pretty much every single Mission Impossible film. How did those flashback? I mean, were you like conscious of past themes from the past scores? Okay, we're going to maybe get a little snatch of Danny in there or something like that to do all of these callbacks to the past films.
The amount of flashbacks, and I'll talk about in particular the scene with Briggs on the plane. That was a perfect example of how the flashbacks really, we had to be so careful. But first and foremost, we had to write a good piece of music that had a good chord progression that could exist with and without a top line melody that could get out of the way for dialogue. Because the scene starts, we need to listen to Tom, we have to listen to Briggs, and then just at a moment when you don't expect, when we go to a flashback, the music has to be composed in a way that it comes at either the start of a melody note or at the start of a chord or in a gap, so it feels natural. There needed to be a dialogue between the speaking voices, the going from Briggs to Ethan, or what we might do is we might use a very special electric violin that we did some sampling of and recording of, so that we could start a flashback just when the electric violin comes around, or rather we might move the electric violin a little bit, and there needed to be this flow. And it always changed whether the flashback would come at the start of a phrase or the end of a phrase. We just had to do it to taste. There were no rules. And I remember when I used to see other films do other things where there'd be flashback, I would think, how do they do that? And then the answer is, it's really hard. And you'd have to do these micro tempo adjustments to make sure that the next phrase started at just the right moment when he says, and when we went back to Prague. And then there's a flashback at that exact moment when the new chord progression starts. It was so hard to engineer those moments, and each one was different. And as they changed things, we had to change along with them. And it was so hard. But I think whenever the audience was brought back, and I've seen the movie 7 times in its completion, and hearing the audience whenever they get to a flashback, when they say back to Prague and they go back to Ethan in the first film, you can hear a lot of people in the audience go, or they breathe back and they go, oh yeah, and they'll elbow their friend and say, do you remember that? Or so that was some of the most gratifying parts, was when we realized that this is working. This technique is working.
Any favorite flashback for you, Alfie?
I mean, you know, the scene Max just talked about, I really, really love. It's just a wash of emotion. And actually, I remember when we were figuring out that scene, McHugh said, "Oh, this is music about the past." And I've never heard that distinction before. You know, music that is about the past or the present or the future. I just thought that was such an interesting way of approaching a piece of music, and that music is about the past. And it's not referential. It doesn't skip to something from Mission 3 and then do a splash of Giacchino. It didn't work like that. It was actually just simply supporting the story that was being told without chopping around. So it's a tricky question to answer because we didn't have flashback music. The music of the film is just amongst the flashbacks, really.
Now I've got a question from Dale. Are there any other favorite low frequency scoring sounds, instruments, and or sonic processes, even beyond Mission Impossible space bass and the contrabass choir sounds?
Well, I think I mentioned Louis Perez, our fantastic French percussionist and string player, multi-instrumentalist. Some of the things that we did and he did that were involving, bowing a bass drum or rubbing a bass drum in such a way that created a sound like a whale. And it was so unusual, where it could be the sound of the submarine, or it could be a low bass doing an effect where you couldn't really tell what it was. And he did some bowing medals where we were able to transpose it very low. And then it takes on this quality where you lean in and you go, what is that? And it might be a very traditional instrument just played very low, or even filtered a little bit, where you might lose the very high metallic sound if it's something metallic. And yeah, that was one of the best parts of the process, because McHugh loved low end. So if it felt natural and almost, I don't want to say animalistic, but some degree of organic, then it worked great. And it might get loud really quickly and then get soft really quickly. But I think this kind of rubbed bass drum stuff worked really, really well.
Yeah.
I mean, I also really love that whole big emotional 9-minute NQ where we just kind of wrap up. Like this, we're not going to get another one of these, but, but it's such a beautiful cue with just how, softly it wraps all of the emotional stuff up. What was the challenge of just charting that? I mean, it goes to speak for so many really long, but always really interesting cues in the score.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. I mean, I remember we really had to work on that cue very hard leading up to one of the first family and friends screenings of the film. And getting that ready felt like doing a film in itself. But, leading up to it, we wrote it kind of off picture. It was a bit of a random idea. Didn't know where or when it would end up and how. And then one day we just heard it blasting out of Eddie's room. And me and Max, we both had these moments where we're making a cup of coffee, which was the kitchen was near Eddie's room, and we heard it coming out and go, okay, something's happening. There's a eureka moment happening next door that we're going to hear about. And they kind of laid it in. And McHugh has spoken about this in other interviews. It's one of the first times they've actually cut something around music. I mentioned they don't use temp, and for the reason that temp can kind of help editors, and they don't do that. They get everything as right as possible without music and then bring in music. But for this time, it's a bit of a montage. So they were able to cut around the music. and kind of prioritize the flow and the balanced structure of the music. And it was a really fun, beautiful part of the process, and it took ages to record. You know, kind of we had to do bits of it spread over a week, but you know, it was great, and people have responded really well to that piece of music on the album, and I'm very glad about that because we loved it too.
I mean, Max, was that particularly important for you to write? Because again, it's like, well, who knows if they're going to be back? This is our last big ass piece of music to wrap up like 8 movies.
Yes, and the last part of that cue is one of the last things we last piece of feedback that Tom had, and the way that that scene ends in the movie is something we changed towards the end, where we had the long piece and it was very emotional, but then we realized that Tom was right, and we needed a shift in tone, a shift in emotion as we go out. And the way we end with kind of, there's a minute and a half or a minute where all of a sudden the mood changes and it becomes a little suggestive, a little cheeky for a different emotion. And coming upon that was super crucial. And the way we used the flute at the end was really a surprise to all of us, and how well that worked. And we were so thrilled that we wrote that and we recorded it that day after McHugh approved it. And recording the bass flute there and the alto flute it's rare in a modern film where you get to appreciate and feature a woodwind in that way, complete foreground, with the biggest star in the world on the out of the biggest film of the year. At least I'm obviously completely biased, but it was so great musically to do that in a fresh, cheeky way, I think.
Yeah.
Before your next question, Daniel, we know Adam is listening, and we got to thank him because we gave him that cue, and then they record it 2 hours later on the last woodwind day. So that's thanks to Adam.
I mean, I can, imagine Tom Cruise, obviously there's nothing to imagine hanging off a plane, but it would be hard to imagine him actually trying to compose this music, because that's how deep he goes as an actor. But what was Tom Cruise's role? Basically, working with Christopher McQuarrie, just in terms of the score. How much did he put into that? Would he be there as you guys were composing? How did that all work?
Most of our creative meetings with Tom. Oh, sorry, Alfie. I'll start. But most of our creative meetings with Tom happened towards the end of the process, when he'd come in and we were trying to figure out the plane scene, and we would play something for him. We did play something for him for the end of the plane scene, and he said, it's not exciting, it's not dangerous, it's not thrilling. And so that's when we go back to the drawing board and we think, okay, well, we've got to rethink this really important part of the movie. And so doing it with trumpets and using the mission theme in a fresh way at the climax of the plane, that was not easy to come by. But I think when we realized that staying higher in the register and keeping things very, I don't want to say lighter, but they needed to have a sense of life to them, and staying away from low tones and keeping it out of the basement, as McHugh called it, really helped us come upon a climax that felt thrilling and exciting, and having trilling strings. And at the end of the process, that was one of my favorite moments. But I think, Alfie, maybe you can tell us about our first meeting with Tom.
Yeah, I mean, to answer the question, Tom was kind of there every step of the way. Our first meeting with him, we had dinner, with him and McHugh and Eddie Hamilton and Cecile and Randy Spendlove and Catherine, the post super, and it was great. And we really got a very good impression, first off, that he is so involved in all of it, and every story point, everything they're figuring out. I mean, Eddie and McHugh and Tom, they're kind of best friends in a way. They've traveled the world, they've shot everywhere, they've made all these films. And I remember when we were finishing the trailer, we were hearing about the process and I know Tom had some notes on the grade, and I remember being so impressed, because it's like he really understands everyone's role, and he really has an opinion and understands what's good and what the audiences want and what will help the end product. So, you know, it was great. And just kind of personally, he was always so enthusiastic and encouraging. You know, there was not a shred of doubt, you know, and I personally just found that so uplifting because, you know, he's he's a movie legend, and you know, we were nervous, and it just helped us so significantly, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think a lot of people's reactions, you know, when they announced, you know, you as the team, it's like, who are these guys? I mean, I certainly knew
Yeah.
who Max was, and forgive me, Alfie, I wasn't.
No, please,
with
I'm a
you.
nobody.
I mean, how do you guys? I mean, obviously, you really pulled this off, and then some. But how do you handle just, you know, psychologically the pressure of just being the new guys? You're like the new recruit for something at this level.
Working for someone like Lauren, you really, I mean, I pulled so many late nights with him and on his projects, and you really learn how to do it. You really need to learn from the best because the technical demands of this film and this process are so great. And to write symphonic music in, you know, overnight that will be played for McHugh the next day, it's very serious. But through lots of practice and writing literally thousands of pieces, it kind of starts to feel like, all right, this is my job. This is what I do for a living. And when a piece is requested of me that is a high, thrilling, climactic 2-minute piece, and it needs to be heard tomorrow, you just put your head down and you focus. And it didn't, in general, it felt like this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm meant to be doing. And there were some stressful moments, but with Cecile, I felt like I don't need to worry about the scope of the whole 2.5 hour score all the time. I need to focus on one piece of music today, and I will do that right now, and I will not worry about the 10 other pieces that I still need to write. And with her leadership, I always felt like all I need to do is my job. I am a writer, and I need to write this scene, and that's that. And I think it's just takes practice to not let the weight of the whole project get down on you too much.
Yeah, I mean, Alfie, how did you handle it? I mean, what was your key to navigating this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad Max brought up Cecile, and you know, I think just having that leader there and someone who understands the process and where we should be and where we shouldn't be, and we should be doing more of this and we should be doing less of this. That was hugely calming, and something I'm very, very grateful for. To be honest, I didn't really cope for like the first kind of little bit because it's scary, and you know, but you know, Max said it. We were speaking about this recently. There was a point where we just come into work, you know, have a cup of coffee, just sit down and go. And you know, we worked in these little rooms, the computer screens in front of us, and you just have to focus on what's in front of you. I hope that doesn't sound ungrateful because I'm aware about how big and important this is, but all you can really do is just the next step.
Now, Geronimo Jehoshaphat would like to know: will you be collectively known henceforth as Godfrey?
Wow,
I don't mind that. I don't mind
that's
that.
a creative. That's a creative stage name, man. Let's see. Listen. Anything is possible. It's just the start.
It's the best one I've heard so far. So as of now, yes.
What makes this work? I guess my wrap up question: what makes you guys work?
I think coming up under Lorne and just understanding how to write a piece of music, how to write a piece of music that works to a scene, how do we change it, how do we edit it. So I think really it's about the foundations, fundamentals, and training, because a score this complicated doesn't get made by just heart. Also, you need to use the brain, and you need to use teamwork, and you need to use a keen ear, and you need to use patience, and it's all about training. It's, you know, this isn't a drama where you can write a few esoteric pieces and then maybe you change them a little bit and you send stems and you walk away. This is so much more complicated and so much more involved, and really it's all about the hard work and the training and the patience and yeah, all the tough stuff.
Alfie, what's the key to this partnership for you?
Yeah, what Max said, it's a very complicated job, and yeah, you have to be incredibly patient because things take a very long time. You know, the version that you need to get played the next day, great, you got it ready the next day, but really the life will be much longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think me and Max complement each other in different ways. We both would do things neither of us would do in certain situations, which is very productive at times. But I think, you know, primarily having worked under Lorne and in that RCP world, you know, knowing what it is you need to bring to the table, knowing how hard you need to work, I think being very mutually you know, we mutually get that, and you know, we're both able to kind of go in head first and understand how hard it's going to be, and we both know that we will bring it. You know, we'll bring it.
Well, I will say congratulations, mission accomplished. Max and Alfie, I want to thank you both so much for joining Film Music Live. See Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning in theaters with Max Aruj and Alfie Godfrey score soundtrack, available on Sony Classical and soon on CD from La La Land Records. Thanks to Christian, Gabriel, and DiCio at White Bear PR, our show producer Dale Turner, graphic designer Mark Banning, and I will see you, and the entity will see you on the next Film Music Live. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you
so
so
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.